These 5 flies are easy to tie. They can be modified many ways, and most important, they catch fish. I'm not tying show flies, I'm tying flies to fish with, so I'm focusing on proportions, durability, and speed, not aesthetics. The bonus is, these 5 flies will teach you some of the most important skills you need to tie just about any other fly. Whether you're new to fly tying or a seasoned vet who wants to shake off some rust, these 5 flies are easy to tie and will catch fish. You're going to need 3 materials to tie the Wolly Bugger: marabou, chenille, and a saddle hackle. The tail is made up of the marabou, and you want to measure that to the length of the shank of the hook. Using the pinch method, you tie it in at the bend, and then you wrap the thread up the marabou along the shank of the hook, creating an underbody. So you tie in a saddle hackle by the tip at the bend of the hook, and then you tie chenille in down the shank of the hook. You tie this down all the way to the back to the bend, and everything's going to work from the bend forward from here on. So I'm tying off so I can use my rotary vise. If you don't have a rotary vise, you don't have to tie off. And then I begin building up the body. I start with the chenille, and then I palmer the saddle hackle up to the eye of the hook. Once I get to the eye of the hook, I pull the fibers back, cut the hackle off, and then begin building my thread head. Now, while I'm building the head, I am pulling those fibers back, which creates a bit of a collar, which is just an aesthetic that I like in a Wolly Bugger. Then you tie your thread off, seal it, and fish it. For the bivisible, you need a brown hackle and a cream or grizzly hackle. Normally this is tied with a light colored thread, but I was all out, so I did it with some black thread. Once you've tied off, you create a little bit of a ball at the bend of the hook. This will help with the tail. You measure the tail to the gap of the hook, and you tie it on in front of that ball. That ball is going to let that tail splay out and look a little more natural and help your fly float a little bit better. The remaining fibers you tie down the shank of the hook, just like the Wolly Bugger, we're creating an underbody. You tie in your brown hackle by the tip at the bend of the hook. Again, wrapping everything down the entirety of the body. You're going to use your hackle pliers to hold on to the feather as you wrap it up the hook. Now, this isn't a palmered hackle. This is a dry fly hackle, so it's going to be tight wraps. You're going 2/3 up the hook, where you tie off and then tie in a grizzly or cream hackle. You're going to finish the last third of the fly with this hackle. You're going to tie it off, cut it, and then build up your thread head. Once you've done that, you tie your thread off, you finish it with some sealer, and you fish it. For the Clouser Minnow, you're going to need a set of dumbbell eyes, 2 different colors of bucktail, typically contrasting, and some crystal flash. You're going to tie the dumbbell eyes in just behind the eye of the hook. I go about 1/8 back, and I'm using a figure 8 method and a lashing method. So I crisscross back and forth over the eyes, and then I wrap thread beneath the eyes over the hook. Now you're going to measure up your bucktail a little bit longer than the shank of the hook, and you tie it in behind the eyes first. Once you've secured it behind the eyes, you advance your thread to in front of the eyes, and you start tying down the bucktail there. Now I make 1 to 2 wraps, and then I make a few wraps underneath the bucktail on the hook, creating a bit of a dam so the bucktail doesn't spin around. Now I'm not going to cut the bucktail very close just yet, so I can pull little bits of bucktail back at a time, making a wrap every time I pull a bit back. What this is going to do, it's going to lock in more of those fibers. Once I've done that throughout the entirety of the bucktail, I cut it tight, clean it up, make a couple more wraps. I bring the thread back behind the eyes where I'm going to tie in the crystal flash. I'm going to tie in a couple pieces on each side. You can use the same piece and fold it over like I just did here. Then you're going to flip the fly over, measure in your red bucktail, and that gets tied in front of the eyes. And I'm using that same method, so I'm going to tie in the fly, pull the bucktail up, build up a little dam underneath it, and then I'm going to pull a little bit of bucktail up at a time, locking everything in. It's the same way I did the top. Once you've done this and cleaned everything up, you build up your head, you tie off your fly, seal it, and you fish it. For the elk hair caddis, you're going to need some hare's ear dubbing, some brown hackle, some gold tinsel, and some elk hair. You tie in the hackle at the bend by the tip of the feather. A lot of people tie the hackle in afterwards, but I like tying it in first. Then I'm going to tie in my gold tinsel. And then I'm going to start dubbing the thread with my hare's ears dubbing. Now it's a caddis, so it's a kind of a shaggy fly, and it is a cigar-shaped body that you're building toward. So it's going to start off thin, work its way thick, and end abruptly. Before I wrap the hackle, I like to make the dubbing a little shaggy. I use my scissors or a dubbing brush. So now you're going to palmer the hackle up the body, followed by the ribbing. Now I'm rocking the gold tinsel back and forth. This is preventing me from catching any of those hackle fibers and pulling them down. Once you're done with the ribbing, you're going to take a pair of scissors to cut the top of the hackle down. You're going to cut it on a bit of an angle, and this is going to help with the wing. You're going to tie in your elk hair wing, starting with a loose wrap, making each wrap going forward tighter and tighter. The reason for this is you don't want to spin or flare that hair out too much. Now, normally I would tie off here, but I forgot, and I jumped ahead and I cut the head of the fly. Now you're not going to cut it tight, you're going to leave that bit of an angle. Then you're going to tie off, you're going to seal it, and you're going to fish it. The pheasant tail is tied with 3 materials: pheasant tail, copper wire, and peacock herl. So we're going to start by adding weight and building up an underbody on the hook. Next, we take a clump of pheasant tail fibers and we measure the tips to the gap of the hook. That's going to create our tail, and it's tied in at the bend of the hook. We tie down the body and then back to the bend of the hook, where we tie in some copper wire. Then we take the pheasant tail fibers and we wrap it up, creating the abdomen of the fly. What you want to do is finish with those fibers pointing up so that we can create a proper wing case later. Before we get to that, we're going to take the copper wire and ribbit up the body. So once you tie off the copper, we're going to take those pheasant tails, that's going to be the wing case, and we're going to wrap back over them. We're going to take some peacock herl, tie it in, and wrap that to create the thorax of the fly. Once you tie in, we're going to take the pheasant tail fibers and pull them over the top, creating a wing case. Once you get that wing case locked in, you're going to cut off the pheasant tail fibers and turn it around and point it backwards. I feel like the tips pointed back like this is a little buggy looking. Once you're done, you tie off your thread, you seal it, and you fish it.